far back as HempFest 2019, we can remember the Minister of Education, Culture, Agriculture, Fisheries, Youth Affairs and Sports mentioning right here in the British Virgin Islands that marijuana legislation is coming. Earlier this year, Premier Foy announcing his intention to give 100 farmers land to cultivate the crop. Well, finally, we're at a point where legislation has hit the House of Assembly and we're ready to have the conversation. Here with us today is the Minister himself to discuss all things marijuana as well as other issues that falls under his portfolio. So stick with us.
Is business slow, cash flow down, hosting an upcoming event? We can help. Advertise with 284 Media and take your business or event to the next level by enhancing your present marketing and messaging strategies. Allow our team of experts to create a personalized ad that sets your business apart from all the rest. This could be your business or event. So, what are you waiting for? Contact our marketing team at 284media@cctbvi.com. Advertising with us works.
Homegrown.
And initiate sequence.
Penetrate this man's soul with my heart.
What?
Watch and learn.
Sir?
As promised, viewers, we are here with the Honorable Minister for Education, Culture, Agriculture and Fisheries, Sports and Youth Affairs here in the British Virgin Islands, the Honorable Natalio Wheatley. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me, Javon, and thank 284 Media for allowing me the platform to speak about this important piece of legislation.
All right, so let's just begin with what the bill itself is and why, as a government, you saw it fit to explore the possibilities, the industry, marijuana.
Well, it's the Cannabis Licensing Act 2020, and we've introduced this act basically to create a statutory authority which will be responsible for basically setting up the marijuana industry here in the British Virgin Islands. We also have an amendment to legislation, the Drugs and Prevention of Misuse Act, that we have to amend basically to allow persons to be able to possess marijuana, and it will no longer be a criminal act to possess marijuana, which is necessary for us to introduce the cannabis industry.
So you're saying that the amendment to the drug use bill will allow for the average person to have small amounts of marijuana across the board?
Well, we have taken a decision as a government, Javon, that persons should not be locked up in jail for the use of marijuana. It's an issue of social justice. So we want to stop the persecution of persons who are using a plant who basically are, it's a plant basically that persons all over the world see medical benefits from. It's a plant that's making persons wealthy, rich, and I think that the world has really moved past prosecuting persons for possessing marijuana. But I must say, Javon, that this bill will tightly regulate the use of marijuana, and it's going to be for medical purposes as opposed to the recreational purposes that some persons use it for. We're saying that marijuana has medical properties. It can help you with many ailments and many illnesses, and that's why we're introducing it here to the Virgin Islands. And so persons will have to conform with the laws. We'll have to do a declaration for persons who have medical illnesses to be able to purchase a certain quantity of marijuana. You're also going to have to get clearance from the doctor to be able to possess the marijuana. So persons won't be prosecuted for maybe like 1 gram of marijuana, which 1 gram is can make about 3 spliffs. We won't prosecute persons for that. But if persons have bigger amounts than that and they don't go through the correct process for being able to possess the marijuana due to some kind of medical ailment, then there are penalties for that. And we encourage persons to be in compliance with the law.
Now, as it relates to the amendment of the drug use bill, just to piggyback a bit, you did mention that no longer should persons be prosecuted for legal amounts once this bill comes into play. But what about those persons who are already prosecuted and are in the system as a result of those prosecutions? What will be the considerations for those persons, specifically prisoners?
Well, it's a good question, and we've put forward an expungement clause within the legislation to wipe the records clean of persons subject to a few conditions that they weren't selling to minors, or they weren't involved in some other criminal activities. Some conditions are outlined there in the bill to completely clean persons' records. Now, I have to tell you that's been a bit controversial with some sections of the government, particularly those responsible for law enforcement and security. So there may be some issues in terms of cleaning the records. But Javon, I have to say to you, I'm pushing hard for it. I'm not sure whether I'll be successful or not. The bill has been introduced to the House of Assembly. It was introduced last Friday, and this Friday we'll have the debate and we'll have the committee stage. And for persons who don't know about the committee stage is where you make certain, the House of Assembly is basically in a committee and they make changes to the bill. So there are still some changes that could be made to the bill. But I have to tell you, I want to fight hard for the expungement of records of all persons who've been prosecuted for marijuana crimes. There's the question of whether you can have legislation that's retroactive. But I believe it's really a social injustice, and this is my personal opinion. I don't attach this to anybody in the government. This is my personal opinion, that it's social injustice to prosecute persons for something that has been used for tens of thousands of years. We have evidence, archaeological evidence, that this was used by Chinese emperors. Egyptian rulers, pharaohs used this. They found it buried in the tombs with them. That Queen Victoria in the 1800s used this for menstrual cramps. That George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and other founding fathers of the United States of America used to farm this. I mean, this was a well-known, well-used plant right up until around 1936 when it was criminalized in the United States. So to prosecute persons, to make them lose their livelihoods, to put a record on their, a record and a stain on their reputation, which will prevent them from being able to get jobs in the future. And even under the rules of this act, a police record would prevent you from being able to be a marijuana farmer, a licensed marijuana farmer. So I do think in an issue of social justice, it's important for us to clean the records of those persons prosecuted for marijuana. But there's some groups within the BVI, particularly in law enforcement and in the justice system, who have a different opinion.
All right, so you did mention that much of what's within this bill is up for discussion. You mentioned very specifically at the committee stage to be discussed within the House of Assembly. How much of public consultation how much of that will be consumed into the massaging of this bill? Because it's always important that when a bill is being introduced that we consult the public. Don't you agree?
Yes, I do agree, Javon. And leading up to this bill being introduced to the public, you rightly said that it was spoken about in the budget speech. It was spoken about in the governor's speech, a legislative agenda. I've been speaking about this probably for about 12 to 15 years. Ever since I returned to the Virgin Islands from school, and I've had a platform on the radio, I've been speaking about it. It's not an issue. We've mentioned it several times in the House of Assembly. We've mentioned it several times in interviews. It's a hot topic for the online news site. So whenever I say something about marijuana, it's reported and persons have a discussion about it.
Right.
In fact, we've been having a discussion about marijuana as a society for years. This discussion has been going on all over the globe. And this week, we have more consultation. It started last night on Public Eye for the Department of Information and Public Relations. It continues today with this interview, and we have several other things planned before Friday. So persons should use this opportunity now to peruse the legislation. You can get the legislation from the sponsoring ministry, which is the Premier's office, given the fact that this is a new revenue honor, and the Ministry of Finance has introduced it under that premise. But we have a strong partnership with my ministry because I'm the Minister of Agriculture. So we can get you the bill if you make contact with the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth Affairs, Sports, Fisheries, or Agriculture, or the Premier's office. You can also get it through the Gazette. If you go to the Gazette website for the BVI government, you'll be able to sign up for an account and download the legislation. From there, take a look at the legislation, provide some feedback so that in the committee stage, we can discuss it. But Javon, now is the time for action. We've debated marijuana for a very long time. All in every corner of society and every corner of the globe, and now we have to act. If we delay any further, you know, our neighbors who are all introducing marijuana legislation or have already introduced marijuana legislation. I'm talking about Antigua, I'm talking about St. Lucia, I'm talking about Barbados, I'm talking about the United States Virgin Islands. We're going to lose ground. And in fact, in the United States, I believe one day it will become federally legal. And when it becomes federally legal in the United States, the industry will be much more saturated than it is now. So this is an industry you have to get in early if you want to see some benefits. And the longer you delay, the more opportunities you'll miss out on.
Agreed. I think we can all agree that this is a lucrative industry as we pan across the world, and like you said, see the many countries taking advantage of it. However, it really boils down to approach as well. I mean, some have attempted it and succeeded, but others have failed as well. So I have to ask, as it relates to any form of study or feasibility studies being done, were we able to do anything like that to not only guarantee that this will be a step in the right direction, but also to make sure it's a viable option as well? Because like you said, the industry might be already saturated. How are we competing per se with that?
Well, we've been in discussion with proposed investors. They have markets abroad that they've secured that will be able to take any amount of marijuana that we can produce.
Okay.
And I have to tell you as well, there's also the possibility and the option of introducing medical tourism here, meaning that we have visitors who visit the BVI to be able to rehab from injuries and things like that. For instance, we have the National Football League out of the United States. We've already been in discussions with former and very popular NFL players, and they are interested in this development and basically allowing NFL players and NBA players to come to the BVI to rehab in the off season, given the fact that the sports are very grueling. It takes a toll on your body, and marijuana is proven to be able to help persons to recover, these athletes to recover. And the NFL, importantly, has chosen no longer to test for marijuana. Given the fact that many players use marijuana, marijuana is now accepted in the United States as something that's of medical value. They've stopped testing marijuana as a part of their drug program. So NFL players can use marijuana, and being able to rehab in a place where there's certainty legislatively that medical marijuana is permitted to be used, as well as the other benefits we have of the weather here, access to the beach, privacy. I think it makes it a very attractive destination for many of these sports figures to come here. And of course, you know, these sports figures, they have a lot of money to spend. They'll spend money in our economy, and many people will be able to benefit from that. So I just say all of those things to say, Javon, that there's a great deal of demand. As much as we think the industry is saturated, now it's going to grow as more persons realize the benefits of marijuana. Because marijuana is actually more effective in treating many of the illnesses that persons are struggling with right here in the Virgin Islands. We have persons who have cancer, and right now marijuana is being tested. A man by the name of Manuel Guzman, a biochemist out of Madrid, is doing trials with mice, where you inject the mice with basically cancer, human cancer, and these mice got tumors on their brains. And when you inject some of the properties of marijuana into those mice, the tumors were gone in a matter of weeks.
Okay.
And I think that's something that shows great promise for humans when they begin human trials. And we know that cancer is a real killer here. And we have certain forms of child epilepsy, an epilepsy period, which the FDA approved CBD to be able to treat. You have marijuana being treatment for persons who have HIV, persons who have problems with their appetite, problems with nausea, Tourette syndrome. I mean, the list of it is on and on. So the demand for marijuana will not decrease. It's only going to increase going further. And so right now, I think is the right time to be able to get into this industry so our people can see the benefits.
All right, so just about a few months ago, the Premier announced that 100 farmers will be permitted in the first instance land to farm. And firstly, how many persons applied so far based on your recollection?
We haven't had any formal application processes yet.
Mm-hmm.
This legislation will create the Cannabis Licensing Authority, and this authority will receive applications.
Okay.
And the Premier did mention that we're going to try to make sure we balance it among the districts.
Get to that next, yeah, okay.
To make sure that the benefits are spread throughout the territory. But I can say just informally, many persons have sent WhatsApp messages. Many persons have called. Many persons have written letters. Probably hundreds of persons have written letters. Each district representative has told me that they've been overwhelmed with the amount of interest in this particular program. Now, I know there's some persons who are worried and concerned about it, and I value their opinions, and I'm willing to have a discussion with them. But there's no doubt, Javon, that there's an overwhelming amount of excitement and interest in participating in this particular industry. Not just as farmers, there's some persons who want to get involved in the research. Some persons want to get involved in being able to sell it to tourists or to make creams with it, or all types of different, make teas with it, to make food and things like that. So there's a great deal of interest in it, Javon, and I expect that to grow as the processes and procedures become clearer.
All right, so as it relates to the production aspect, will production be in closed greenhouse environments just so that we prevent cross-pollination?
We're going to have a controlled environment, but it's going to be outdoor growth for the most part. Mm-hmm. One of the proposed investors will have a greenhouse for seedlings and for what we call clones. But for the most part, we're going to be doing this in Paraquita Bay, 50 acres in Paraquita Bay in the hills. We're not disturbing the farmers who are presently farming, even though, Javon, I have to tell you that in Paraquita Bay, we have plans to make sure that we're being more productive in terms of land use, and persons can expect to hear more about that in the near future. But the marijuana will not disturb any of the existing farmers which are there. We're going to continue to help and support our farmers. We recently put $2 million into fishing and farming. That shows our commitment to fishing and farming. We are introducing new legislation which I'm going to do. We've been doing consultations on this new legislation for fishing and farming, and we have lots of plans. We have revenue streams that's going to become directly into the fishing and farming industry. So a lot is happening in fish and farming, and I want the farmers and the fisher persons to know that we're not ignoring you. In fact, I think introducing the marijuana industry will certainly actually help these other industries to grow and flourish as we introduce more investment and more expertise. We're going to be given more scholarships, things like that. But it's going to be outdoor grow. We're going to have a secure environment. That's one of the reasons why we're doing it in Paraquita Bay, because we want to be able to provide security, cameras, in some instances fencing, a controlled environment to ensure that we don't have persons coming in there to steal and things like that. Every plant that will be planted will be accounted for. It will be tagged so we can know if persons do not, have all the amount of plants that were planted. We will be able to tell if one plant is missing. It's going to be a computerized system hooked up to a database. So every plant that's planted, we'll know exactly when that plant is even sold or even exported. All of it is going to be computerized using the latest technology. So we believe that we have a good system here for accountability purposes and for security. And you mentioned cross-pollination.
Yes.
This investor who we're dealing with now has a very wide, broad experience in both indoor and outdoor grow, and knows exactly how to deal with some of the matters of cross-pollination. In fact, he's an agronomist, so he's very familiar with growing the plants. Of course, he has to get familiar with the environment that we have here in the Virgin Islands. He has to speak to many of the farmers that we have here who are already planting marijuana, and once we legalize it, maybe they'll show their faces a little more freely. And then we'll be able to get the show on the road.
All right, what about the tax rate on these products? Because I know high taxes may work for governments on government's behalf, but many persons across the region is already complaining about high taxes as it relates to the marijuana product. What would be our considerations on this?
Well, I'll have to tell you that will have to be dealt with in a separate bill, bills that deal with revenue, inland revenue.
Okay.
And our customs laws, because of course we want to have an export tax. So that will have to deal with our customs laws. So we're discussing the right figure, but I can tell you that the investor who has actually been keen and has been willing to pay up to 20% tax. But given the lucrativeness of the industry, the investor will make lots of money. The farmers, because I should tell you, Javon, the structure of the business will be that only our local farmers will participate in this industry. And the investor simply will, first of all, help you set up the farms, and he's going to buy the marijuana directly from the farmers.
Okay.
And the farmers will make a lot of money that way. I mean, we just have conservative estimates. It's going to make persons very wealthy here in the Virgin Islands. The investor is going to make his money. We expect for him to be able to make money. That's the reason he's investing. So it's a win-win. And the government will make millions and millions of dollars in tax revenue every year.
All right, just last night via your GIS feed, like you mentioned earlier, the Public Eye Forum, you mentioned that there's not only a huge appetite, but also a lot of local support towards the marijuana legislation. A lot of persons, however, Minister, are of the opinion that this applies to recreational usage. And you did mention earlier that persons will be expunged and maybe not maybe not criminalized for using the product. But what do you say to those persons who may be a bit confused as to what this is?
Well, I'll repeat again. This thing is going to be tightly controlled. We don't want minors to get access to the marijuana, because we know that marijuana can have mind-altering effects and even affect the developing brain of young persons. we are introducing this marijuana for medical purposes only. But having said that, we don't want to see persons going to jail for marijuana. We don't want that, so we prefer to introduce other types of programs to help persons who are possessing marijuana for other recreational purposes. But we want to make it very clear that persons who will be possessing marijuana legally will have to do so for medical purposes. Now, people who, I know that there are persons in the BVI are already using marijuana recreationally, and I'll have to tell those persons that that will remain illegal. Recreational marijuana will remain illegal, but perhaps maybe the prosecution of these illegal acts will be a bit different. Perhaps maybe we try to help persons more, educate them more about the proper use of marijuana, because Javon, let's face it, many persons use marijuana in the Virgin Islands, persons who have good jobs. You know, even a doctor told me that he uses CBD, and told me, the doctor actually told me that the CBD will put many doctors out of business here in the Virgin Islands because of the impact of it. You know, so many persons use marijuana for different purposes. You have the religious community, and in the committee stage, I'm going to fight for the religious community. I'm going to fight for the members of the Rastafari faith, because they have been trumpeting and declaring the benefits of marijuana for a long time. It's a part of their religious faith. I believe they should be able to use marijuana without hindrance, and I'm going to fight for that, I have to tell you. And there's some persons who just, they just like how it makes them feel. So I'm aware of these persons. I'm also aware, Javon, that we have to do a lot of education when it comes to marijuana, so persons can understand the proper uses of it. It's a plant that God gave us. God gave us a plant. It's not something that a man made. It grows out of the ground, and it's been used for many years. And we want to educate persons about the properties in marijuana. This is why I'm so excited about the research aspect of it. Marijuana has 480 medically important compounds. Some of them, 60 of them, are cannabinoids, which react to what we call cannabinoid receptors throughout the body. And they have different impacts on different parts of your brain and different parts of your body. And this is why it's so exciting, some of the research that's taken place medically for marijuana, because each of those compounds, each of those 480 compounds has a different impact on something different. Sometimes some of these compounds have opposite effects. Sometimes marijuana can stimulate you. Sometimes it can calm you down. Sometimes it can make you more creative. So there's a lot of different things that it can do for persons that can help you with lots of different ailments. I should say to you, Javon, that there's this man by the name of Doug Bench. He was a judge in Florida. He's now a retired judge. He got COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He was given 2 years to live, and his wife encouraged him to try cannabis. So he put cannabis oil under his tongue every night, and his cancer went into remission. But the interesting thing about Doug Bench's story is that as a judge, he prosecuted about 311 persons for marijuana crimes. And he became sick and needed the same marijuana that he used to prosecute persons for to save his life. And now he's an advocate. He's an advocate for medical marijuana, and he's fighting to make sure that persons have access to it. This is something that we have to study. We have to research it. And once we research, we'll be able to tell the entire world about the benefits of these 480 medically important compounds found within marijuana. And we might even be able to cure some illnesses that right now do not have a cure.
All right, so just a few days ago, the Premier and Minister for Finance, Honorable Andrew A. Foy, announced that we could reap just about $30 million annually And I think to the average person, this seems like a pretty ambitious number, Minister. As a government, how did you come up with that projection?
Well, based on the acreage that we have, basically per acre you'll probably get about 2,000 plants. And a conservative estimate for the amount of pounds that you could get on each plant is about 1 pound. But I know, based on what I've been told, that we can have plants that are 2 pounds at least, and even larger than 2 pounds.
Okay.
So you multiply the amount of pounds by how much that this marijuana will be sold for on the open market, and you get a figure. And then once you get that figure, you're able to divide the percentage that government will charge for the export of it, and that gives you a figure.
Okay.
And actually, I would have to say to you that the Premier has been very conservative in terms of the projections, and he's purposefully being conservative, of course, because you don't want to over budget.
Okay.
And then you fall short. So he's done more on the lower end as opposed to the higher end. But of course, this is once the industry is properly set up. We have all the farms set up, and we have the export markets taken care of. So there'll be a little growing pains getting it set up. But once it's set up, it's going to be very beneficial to the government.
All right, we have to begin to tighten up a bit as it relates to time, but we're projected to reap just over $30 million. But what are we investing as a government, as a territory, to turn over that amount of capital?
Well, that's one of the great things about this, Javon, is the government is not putting in much of anything, and the government is going to be getting millions and millions of dollars of tax revenue.
Okay.
Farmers don't have to do much except for keep their plots clean, make sure that you deal with pests, deal with weeds that will try to choke the weed, and you just do like basic what farmers do: take care of your plot and keep your plants going and looking nice. The investor is going to be providing all the materials, all the equipment, all of the processing equipment, laboratory equipment, everything that we're going to need. The investor is going to provide those things. So we don't have to put in much. We've made land available to farmers, and we've created this licensing authority. We've created legislation. There may be one or two other concessions that we'll be willing to give. But by and large, this is an industry that's going to attract big-time investment, and it's going to provide big-time returns. And all government really had to do is to create the environment for the industry to thrive.
All right, Minister, as we begin to wrap up on that part of the conversation, I think the big question is, when do we move from medicinal marijuana or medicinal use to recreational? I think that's the question, because like you said, and like we've acknowledged throughout this interview, marijuana is being used in the BVI, even though it's illegal. A lot of young persons turn to it. Persons with ailments are currently using it. It is still in an illegal process, but persons are nevertheless resorting to the use of marijuana. So while this sounds good for a portion of our population, and again, that is for the persons who may be using it for medical treatment, it does sound like somewhat of a lash to persons or to our recreational users, especially our young people who are fearful that they may be penalized for the use of marijuana. So when do you anticipate as a government we can graduate from medicinal use to recreational use, if you're able to say at this point?
Well, I think once we get the industry set up and going, we can always review our decisions and see how they're working. And I expect for us to make adjustments based on what's taking place, based on our recollection or our analysis of the situation. A number of changes are possible. I know that persons will be proposing recreational. It's something that we have to be very careful about. It's something that we have to educate persons about. Whenever you introduce a new industry like this, there's some growing pains. There's some things that you have to learn from. So we're going to reevaluate on a regular basis. We'll have a licensing authority that will have expertise from law law enforcement, from medicine, from business, and their job is going to be to examine this industry and to see how it's working and to see what changes need to be made. And then the cabinet and the government of the day will have to make some of these changes as required. But I want to let those persons know who are currently using recreationally. We don't expect some of the harsh penalties that have existed in the past to continue. That's not to say we're allowing persons to do it, but we're just saying that to criminalize persons for marijuana, I think is the wrong approach. We can try counseling, we can try education, we could try some social programs to try to help persons to overcome some of their difficulties. And hopefully persons will use marijuana in a way that's beneficial to them and to the society.
All right, under your portfolio as well, schools, the reopening of schools, and we're going to touch on this really quickly because I know you have to go shortly. A lot of persons have been pushing, especially parents, even some teachers, for the reopening of schools. We know that we are living in the era of COVID-19, and there are many challenges as it relates to our health, but more specifically, our children who may not be as civilized or as controlled as an adult as it relates to the effects, the challenges of COVID-19. Most recently, just about a week ago, a post made to Facebook essentially accusing you of some level of bias as it relates to the Montessori school. I have to ask, as we begin to wrap up, did you give this school permission to reopen, and essentially, was it closed down at midday by the Ministry of Health? Can you bring some level of clarification to that? Because we also reached out to the principal of that school, and he declined to comment. And I think persons are really up in the air as to what really happened. And I think it really gives a clear pathway as well for other schools as it relates to what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, Javon, some weeks ago, Cabinet made a decision. And this is from advice from our health officials. And maybe, Javon, what I should do is explain a process for which anything has been opened or closed in this COVID-19 era. We have our health officials who would come to Cabinet, and they would come with recommendations, and they would come with information, they would come with statistics. They would come from guidance, both locally, regionally, internationally, and they would make some recommendations to Cabinet about what actions we should take or not take. Now, Javon, like many persons, at first when it came to closing schools down, I was a little skeptical. And these are things that we have big discussions on in Cabinet. I was a little skeptical because at the time we didn't have any cases. But, I was persuaded that this was the right way to go. And under the law, the Minister of Health had the power to close down the schools. And I agreed. After some discussion, I agreed. And it turns out, that we got some cases some weeks after that. And I thought that it was the right decision to make to close the schools because, Javon, I would be gutted. I would be devastated if we ever had a breakout of COVID-19 in the schools. Now, many persons, I would say we are somewhat a victim of our own success because many places around the world, you have outbreaks in schools. You have teachers who bring COVID-19 and give it to students. You have students who give COVID-19 to other students and give it to teachers. And after having the schools open, they have to close the schools again. And we have persons who've died in schools as a result of COVID-19 in different countries. Well, persons say, well, BVI doesn't have COVID-19. But the reality is, if there's the possibility that we could have another outbreak because our borders are open, and as many precautions as we are taking these precautions to help our persons, there's always the possibility that somebody comes through the border illegally, that somebody comes through and perhaps you test them and you have a bad test. The test doesn't correctly state what it's supposed to state. As much as we hope that these things work perfectly, they don't. So we are being very cautious, especially during this period where we've recently opened up the borders. And that cautious approach, I think, has served us well. Persons who've been less cautious, let's take a look at the United States of America. Let's take a look at several countries in Europe. Persons who have been less cautious have paid the consequences. So I understand that persons have been having a difficult time. Really, COVID-19 are really pushing us to our limits. The groups which I think have been hit some of the hardest are the daycare centers and the private schools, because of course parents don't want to pay if their children are going to be at home. So I know it's tough. I know it's been hard on them, but I want to let them know that we have all of these discussions in cabinet. You know, we fight it out, and then when we come out from cabinet, we have collective responsibility. All of us have to defend all of the decisions made in cabinet. I'm not going to second guess the advice of health officials. I'm not going to second guess the decisions of cabinet. I think we've done a pretty good job so far. And I can let all schools know that I think I have a cabinet paper, maybe in cabinet today, that we're looking at daycare centers. So, you know, some weeks ago, cabinet mandated that my ministry, along with the Ministry of Health, do some more work when it comes to daycare centers. And we've done that, and cabinet will make a decision on it.
I'm sorry to cut you. When you say do some more work, can you specify what that means? Because I know initially when you made the announcement on May 31st, you did say that you will be consulting with schools to ensure that they fit the criteria, but I'm not sure what that criteria looks like, as many of our viewers.
Okay, well, that's two different things. The criteria that we made a decision about before the limited reopening of schools allowed students who were sitting standardized exams to come into school, senior students who are sitting standardized exams, students who have special needs, like let's say like autism or attention deficit disorder or something like that, who are having difficult time with the online schooling to come in. Students who are technical students, maybe they needed to use the auto mechanics lab at the schools, because that's something that can't be done online. And students who are marginalized in some way, they have maybe difficulty accessing a computer device or internet or something like that. So students were approved to come in based on those categories. And there was some attempt to kind of stretch it to some other groups. And in advice from health officials, that wasn't the intention of those concessions. Anybody who would like to open outside of those categories have to wait for further decisions from cabinet. And in the fall, school for most places is closing within a month, you know, of today. Most schools are closing within a month. I think there's some private schools closing even probably the end of this month. And so right now we're looking at rules, protocols for summer schools, which I think is a part of the slow reopening of schools. And in the fall, we're looking at bringing more students on campus, perhaps having a shift system. We'll have a system where we reduce contact hours, probably have a blend of online learning and face-to-face instruction. So I think we should see by the next school year some changes, but at the same time, we have to learn to live with COVID-19 and practice protocols, so you don't have the same amount of students in a class.
All right, I'm glad that you said learn to live with COVID-19, because like you mentioned before, the world over minister is also dealing with the dangers of COVID-19 within the schools. And I do agree that our children are at risk, but many parents are also concerned that as a case pops up, we continue to pull back. And how long can we continue to do that realistically? So I think one of the main concerns at this point is the ministry or yourself being able to provide some level of timeline or at least some key performance indicators that we're looking for as it relates to when we'll be able to get back to some level of normalcy in the schools. So I'm not sure if there's anything further you can say to that as we begin to wrap up.
Well, in terms of what we look at when we make these decisions, we look at the local situation, but we also look at the situation in the region. United States of America is exploding right now with cases. And you know our relationship with the United States of America. We have lots of students who are in the United States of America and are returning home now. The Dominican Republic are exploding with cases. Jamaica has lots of cases. Puerto Rico has lots of cases. We've seen some cases flare up in the United States Virgin Islands. In fact, some things to be concerned about because they seem to have some spread and they don't know who's spreading it. So we don't want to find ourselves in that particular situation. Yes, when a case pops up and we have it contained, that there's less concern. But we also have to make sure we don't have any cases pop up where we don't know who's spreading it. We have community spread and we don't know where the origin is. So there's a need to be cautious. But we look at the local situation, we look at the regional situation, and we make decisions based on that. It's a fluid situation. I can't tell you for certain what will happen in September, but I can say what our intent is. But if something pops up, we may have to adjust the situation. And it's not just having a case. It's what's the circumstances that led to the case? Was the case one that we got in quarantine? Or was it a case where we can't really trace the origin of it? You know, so these are things that health officials have and cabinet members have to weigh when we're making decisions. I'm telling you, it's not easy at all, but we're doing the best I can, and I think that our results have been fairly good so far, even though, you know, we don't want to lose any lives. We lost one life, and, you know, that's something that we are all very disappointed about, and we don't want to have that situation come back again.
All right, Honorable Minister, it was such a pleasure, quite a mouthful as we aim to bring clarity not only to the cannabis bill that is before the House of Assembly. I know you did mention that it had its first reading. The second and third reading is set to go before the House when?
On Friday.
We'll
have the debate, and then we'll have the committee stage where some further changes can be made. So it's important for persons to peruse the legislation right now and to send in their comments to the ministries, and then we will weigh all of the different comments were made and potentially make some changes.
All right, also speaking to the school issues that's coming up on social media ever so often as parents are rightfully concerned about the status of school. So thank you so much once again for bringing much needed clarity and speaking so eloquently to both of these issues that happens to fall under your portfolio. And of course, I do think that the government is doing a good job as it relates to COVID-19 and our response. We have said several times on Tweet for Media here that the BVI's response to COVID-19 more than likely will be modeled in the Caribbean and highlighted for many reasons. So we do applaud the efforts as it relates to the health aspect and what has been brought forward so far, and of course continue to wish you all the best going forward.
Thank you, Javon, and thank you to 284 Media. Continue to doing the good job you're doing of keeping the public informed. Thank you.
All right, viewers, my name is Javon Wilson. This has been a 284 Media exclusive with Honorable Natalio Wheatley. Thank you so much for joining us.
Homegrown.
There's a world full of other trolls. How different can they be?
Are we in Florida?
Oh my God.
Yes. You want top of power?
You want top of power?
Join the prepaid party with CCT and enjoy more affordable data plans, more top-up promotions, more savings with hero bundles, and more value for your money each and every Tuesday with Top Up Turn Up Tuesday. Visit a CCT store today or anywhere CCT Top Up is sold and top up your phone.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. You want top of power?